Melissa. I'm excited about today. So I'm going to be honest, everyone. Those of you who come to Corporate Vision's webcasts, you're going to be super shocked that I don't assume the entire time. In fact, I will cede most of the time today to Alex Gill, and I'll tell you more about him in a second. From time to time at Corporate Visions, as those of you who follow our work know, we are this is a no opinion zone. This is data driven only zone, and we like to use these webcasts to talk about our latest research or our partnered research. And the thing that I appreciate about Alex and the work at Harte Hanks is they do this kind of work you're going to hear about today with and for lots of companies so they can accumulate lots of data, and from that anonymized data they see things. And so everything you're going to hear today is hard-won insights from actual work with and for many different companies in the B2B arena that Harte Hanks does. So we're excited to partner with them and bring this data-rich experience today. I'm also partial to this idea of the customer experience. If you know, we wrote our most recent book on the expansion sale, and recognizing that existing customers, keeping and growing them is the biggest part of your number and your growth. So understanding how we can be better there is something we always want to bring to the market. So now I want to introduce Alex. My picture is on this next slide, but this is about what you're going to hear from me. Most of what you're going to hear from is my peer, Alex Gill, the global head of strategy and at Harte Hanks. And so both of us kind of stay steeped in the data and then draw insights from it. And our main job is to share that back with the marketplace so that we can add some value to your day. Alex, thanks for being here. I've gone through the deck with you. I'm super excited about what you're going to tell everybody. So I'm going to get out of the way and turn it over to you.
Awesome. Well, thanks for the great tee up, Tim, and hello everyone. Thank you for taking the time today to learn a little bit more really about what we see and what we're learning through our data-driven work with our clients. I head up strategy at Harte Hanks globally, and we help brands drive revenue and loyalty, deliver great experience, and at the same time try and reduce effort and cost, both for our clients' teams and their end customers. You've probably guessed I'm based in the UK. I've been with Harte Hanks for about 14 years now. And when I'm not obsessing over, data-driven revenue and customer experience and strategy, I like to try and keep fit and listen to music. And you'll get a little window onto my taste in music a bit later as we go through our story today. So, what are we talking about today? CX pressure becomes revenue risk. And what we're really seeing across all of our clients and all the conversations and a lot of the data we glean from our partners like eMarketer and Mintel is that customer experience is no longer a function on its own adjacent to revenue. It's increasingly part of the revenue system itself. And what does that mean? It means poor experiences no longer create only operational problems. They can create pipeline risk, retention risk, expansion risk, brand risk. And that's really important, especially in the B2B world that I imagine many of you are based in, where renewals and expansion, especially if you're a SaaS company or a software provider or a hardware and tech provider, renewals and expansion and so on are really important. So experience isn't just about helping protect revenue as well, it's shaping the future growth of your brands. And so we're going to talk about three things today. Firstly, how CX is now a really integral part of that bigger revenue system. Then we're going to dip into some of the pressure points, and this is where some of that sort of data-driven information that Tim was referencing comes into play. So through our work, we are increasingly learning what are the pressure points in that end-to-end revenue journey and what can we start to do about them to fix them. And we'll wrap up with talking about how some of the winning companies orchestrate, and that's the word of the day, orchestrate some or all of that revenue journey. So let's dig in. Many of you will probably recognize this chart. This is a corporate visions chart. If you're an active Emblaze member or have worked with Tim and crew, I love the visual. It sort of really helps us reframe revenue more holistically in terms of acquisition on one side, but retention and expansion on the other. And the fact that your customers and prospects, before they become customers, go on a journey, they make their purchase, but only when they make that purchase do other things happen in terms of upsell, cross-sell, expansion. So it's a really good diagram to sort of frame things up. In terms of data points, I just want to show a few really interesting stats. And these really ground ourselves in what we call the economics of today's customer experience. Firstly, what the data is showing is that literally one poor interaction can trigger long-term trust erosion and even cause the client to churn away. So, your room for error, margin for error is small. 80% of B2B buyers say the experience matters as much as the products. So, great product, great software, that's fine. But actually, if you have a poor experience at any point in that journey, that B2B buyer might have a problem. Another great stat, 86% of customers will leave after as few as 2 poor experiences. So, similar to that one, but, literally 86% of your customer base could leave if they have 2 bad support calls or if the product stops working and you don't solve that problem well. And then lastly, but not leastly, and this is a great stat from our partner eMarketer, there's been a 12% growth from 59 to 71% in people dissatisfied, customer dissatisfaction in the last 5 years. So what are we doing to try and deliver better customer experience and better buying experience isn't working. People are getting more and more dissatisfied. Revenue doesn't disappear all at once either. So it's, as mentioned, 1 or 2 interactions can cause a problem. So if there's a delay with the onboarding, if someone has to have something explained to them several times, in terms of how to use the software, a poor handoff from sales to customer success, or a poor handoff from service to back office support teams dealing with an escalated problem, all of those things can cause moments of friction, and they all build up to potentially impact on your revenue. Collectively, all these things shape trust, confidence, retention, and growth. So before we look at how CX is becoming part of the system, though, let's take a moment to digest our first really insightful quote and a little music snippet. And please play along. If you know the song, pop it in the chat, and you'll realise I'm an 80s child when you hear this. Hopefully that's pretty obvious what this is. We're going to move these refrigerators. We're going to move these colour TVs. Of course, we all know who that is. That's Mark Knopfler singing Money for Nothing back in 1985. I could have picked any song off my running playlist, but this one struck a chord with me actually as I was running last week, and I thought, I can use this song. And I basically changed the quote. It's revenue for nothing and your renewals for free. And what we mean there really is that revenue may look recurring on paper, but actually it isn't. Renewals and retention have to be earned, and they're earned through experience. So, that illusion that recurring revenue just comes automatically, it just doesn't. You've got to keep re-earning it through great experience, especially if you're in a subscription model world, an enterprise IT world where you're selling software with services around that. And if you don't use the software, you don't adopt it, then, the next renewal, the next upgrade just doesn't happen. So renewals are not automatic. Expansions are not automatic. So now let's look a little bit at how CX is an integral part of the revenue system. So what we're seeing is that experience is no longer just a support function. In the old world, sales used to drive revenue, support would resolve issues, and CX would measure satisfaction. We've got a high CSAT, great, things are good, but nothing's wrong. We don't need to worry about things. But actually what we're seeing is a real kind of new world where experience is shaping the acquisition, the retention, the expansion, everything we do to drive loyalty with a client and an existing customer. And we've got to re-earn that through much better experience. So essentially, experience has become part of the operating system of growth. You'll all recognize the next chart. This is a classic customer journey chart. And, customers, whether it's in B2B or B2C, go on this journey. We know in the B2B world, a huge part of this journey is hidden. 50%, I think, is the quote that's regularly cited, where of the journey happens without you knowing what's going on. Brands looking at your products and services online, trying to understand things. And then that journey continues. Hopefully they make a purchase, they receive the product, they start to adopt it after the training. Hopefully it's being used. There may be a problem, they seek help. And ultimately they decide, okay, I'm going to order less, I'm going to stop buying, or I'm going to renew. In fact, I'm even going to expand. And I might even choose to give you a really good review and advocate for your product. So that journey we're all familiar with. And obviously the acquisition, retention, expansion plays along that journey. But in reality, it can go quite well. People are interacting with your business and with your org chart in effect. And so in the need stage, they're looking at your website, they're interacting with marketing. In the buying stage, more when they're selecting, they're interacting with sales. But what actually happens is they also experience gaps in your org chart and gaps in your end-to-end revenue system. And these gaps are the pressure points that we're going to really dig into. Customers feel these bad handoffs, repeated explanations, unclear ownership, a poor transition from sales into onboarding. And those are what we're going to look at in terms of the pressure points. But before we do, this is what we're aspiring to do. We're aspiring to turn this journey into a continuous experience loop. And that's the ideal journey both for your customer and for you as your business. If we can get it right, it should look like this. The functions start to be more aligned. And as you can see, marketing and sales start to work in harmony to sort of solve for that revenue journey. Onboarding and success work in harmony. Operations and support work in harmony. And that becomes the basis for a really smooth customer experience and ultimately allows customers to start advocating and buying more and expanding and staying ultimately. And before we look at the pressure points, I'm just going to give you a sneak peek of what the revenue system should then look like. And this is sort of a modern revenue system where marketing and sales working in harmony to drive revenue. They're interconnected with what we call the relationship sphere. And that sphere focuses on things like the onboarding, the growth, the retention. And then the retention sphere is all about the service and support and resolving those problems. And if you can put that all together and orchestrate that smoothly, then you're well on the way to keeping that revenue and retaining and expanding things. But it's not that easy. So let's have a little look at our pressure points. So as we mentioned, there's multiple pressure points. But before we look at those, we're going to take another quick musical interlude. So see if you can recognize this quote. Hoping to keep you all awake. There's a little bit of music. Pretty obvious, this one, I think. Of course, that's Under Pressure by Freddie Mercury and Queen and David Bowie back from 1981. And again, not just a random choice. What we're seeing is your revenue system is under extreme pressure. And it rarely appears all at once. It actually accumulates through a series of pressure points. And that's what we call experience friction. The pressure builds up and it explodes. You lose that customer, you lose that opportunity to gain revenue. So what are those pressure points? So we have our journey. Everything should be smooth, but actually there's 6 really key pressure points. The first one's in the buying experience, and we'll dig into that shortly. The second one is the disconnect between sales and delivery. We sell something, the customer is expecting a great product, great service to be delivered on a certain date, to work in a certain way. That doesn't happen. You're already on a problem in terms of where you're going to go next. We have the adoption and usage pressure point. So you might sell a revenue solution or a software solution with 100 licenses, but actually if only 10 people truly use that platform. And if only five of them use every function in that, again, you're on the road to nowhere. The fourth pressure point is around a service or product problem. So this is what you might expect to start thinking, okay, there's a problem with the software. There's a problem logging in. I can't do what I was hoping to do. That creates a pressure point and a potential problem. So we need to be able to solve that. Then it becomes another pressure point around the repeat or the renewal or the expansion time. Should I renew my subscription? Should I buy some more licenses? I've got five new staff, but is now the right time? Am I getting the maximum return from this piece of software? Is it doing everything I want it to do? Or should I consider an alternative? And then the final pressure point, it's already too late in a way, but some people have decided to leave for something better, or they've taken some of their business elsewhere and they've kind of reduced the amount of spend they have with you, especially if it's a transactional, like online e-commerce type situation. But maybe we can do something about that as well if we understand that and know what to do. So those are our six big experience pressure points. But let's dig in. And what we want to do now is take you through what those pressure points are and show you a couple of case studies along the way to show you how they're showing up in our world and some of the solutions and outcomes that come from that. So the first pressure point, it's the first impression, that piece before the customer even buys. They're actually looking at you and they're evaluating your responsiveness. They might go onto your help desk or your help center and see if they can get some information. They could even be looking for some guidance on which version of the software to buy if it's a software business. So customers begin judging that relationship before they even become a customer. And these buying experiences can shape long-term trust and confidence and also shape the short-term conversion into a customer. And those bad buying experiences obviously risk your revenue. Some examples of this, so service reviews, I think we're all familiar, and this is increasingly the case in the B2B world with things like G2, peer referrals. If you have bad service reviews, your prospects are probably going to hunt those down, and it will set their tone, set their mindset. So we need to do everything we can to minimize having bad service reviews, which is probably a customer service thing and it's a product thing. Poor online experience at the point of purchase. So we see this with some of e-commerce brands. If the journey is a bit inefficient, if there's too many steps, if it's complicated, if it doesn't remember what you ordered last, all those things that you expect, as normal from the world of Amazon and the B2C world, then that can drive problems. And then poor interactions with customer service pre-purchase. As I said, some people will interact with your customer service and your customer experience functions to want to learn a bit more about the product or see how it's going to respond. And if they get a bad interaction, then you're in trouble. So first impressions matter. So how can we mitigate for that? Improve that buyer experience. Better experiences create better revenue outcomes. We've got to try and spot and reduce pre-purchase friction. And we've got analytics, diagnostics, we can run surveys. We need to fix customer experience issues that show up in the buying stage. So those reviews I mentioned, if we can solve for those and get less and less bad reviews and get obviously more 5-star reviews, then that's going to show up well in the prospect to the prospect. Aligning your teams and systems to show up better from start to finish, so they know that they're going to experience a seamless journey right from the start. And also, this is where the CVI methodology is really interesting, and we practice this. You've got to think how you'll live up to the why change and the why now messaging. I know, Tim, you've probably got a view on how this might kick into play in making a good first impression.
Couple things that jump out at me from your work and the research, and I think you're going to share some examples. But when we look at win-loss data and what's predictive of a win and what's predictive of a loss, one of the things that keeps coming back is how you resolve issues and concerns and questions responsively in the buying journey. People have questions about your implementation. They have questions about your solution, and how let's just say how your sales team reacts, and then the people they might pull in from the customer experience team, how they perform in that buyer journey buyers believe is predictive of the experience they're going to have after they buy you or not. And so they're judging the implementation and the ongoing experience they're going to have based on the experience they're having in the buyer journey. So we can't not be responsive in certain ways in the sales process and expect people to go, I think it'll get better after I buy you. So I really took away from this is they are always judging what the customer experience
100%.
is going to
Yeah.
be like, regardless if they're still in the buying experience. And yes, promises made to the decision makers need to translate to the doers. And more and more that, and we'll get into the handoff point here in a second. More and more, what we're seeing is that moment of why did we make this decision? Now let's go do the thing we decided on. Is got to get tighter and tighter because we're finding that gap of all the friction points. And maybe this is a good segue to your next point. That's like now the top of the heap. Because promises made, promises kept, as opposed to promises made, now let's figure it out on the other side and hope we get there, is not acceptable.
100% agree. And I think you have good segue in the next pressure point. One of those things is, how we've talked about things to those senior leaders that we're probably selling to, and then are they seeing that show up in, you know, immediately after the sale is made in the onboarding and in the use of the product. So we'll definitely lean into that. But as you say, we're being judged, so brilliant experience has to be happening from the get-go. And where one of the kind of customers where we learned about this was a leading online travel company where we're trying to drive property listings for them. And so these are small businesses, and we're trying to encourage them to list properties. And by having a much improved buyer experience that really looks at them, looks at their journey, and it's more of a nurture approach than say, let's just try and get them in at any given point in time of the year. We're nurturing them over time. We're nurturing them based on where they are in that buying journey. It's a highly data-driven approach, and that allows us to get the right message in front of those different people based on what matters to them. Again, first impressions matter. And if they're more about growing their business fast, or they're more about delivering a brilliant hosting experience, that makes enables us to make a conscious choice about what we tell them about our solution. Omnichannel is not just a digital world. Speaking to these people via phone, via LinkedIn, as well as through various digital channels becomes important. And the insights we glean when we're having those conversations are as valuable as the listings themselves. And really, then it becomes a case of orchestrating that partner's journey through that life cycle, how we educate them, how we get them to sign up, how we help them sign up, and ultimately how we get them to make the most of their listing and add more properties ultimately. And because of that sort of orchestrated nurture type approach, we've been able to exceed targets 3 years running, and the listings are growing, which is fantastic. So that's a really good example. Now, segue to second pressure point, and Tim alluded a little bit to this, the sales to delivery disconnect. And this is one of the fastest ways to destroy trust. If you promise them the earth and deliver them nothing, then they're going to get unhappy very quickly. And this is the moment where operational reality fails to match the promise that customers bought into and that the senior leaders bought into. So what we need to do, we know customers are going to judge us. But we've got to avoid being too generic in what we do. Generic onboarding, slow replies, going straight to a junior team once we've won the business, going straight to a ticket-driven model. Customers don't want to fill in a ticket to get going with their relationship with you. They want to have a positive conversation and do things smoothly. And getting away from very fragmented ownership between onboarding and support and operations, all those different functions need to work together. So some other ways we can address this expectation gap, we need to spot that onboarding friction, again, using analytics and diagnostics and surveys. One thing we found very effective with some of the clients we've worked with is to create a promise to deliver governance. So as a brand, you should create that promise to deliver and then measure yourself against it relentlessly. Massive point is alignment, aligning sales, success, and support, especially sales into the operational part of your business. It's often overlooked. Sales are off to the next opportunity if we're not careful. But actually, you know, the customer they've just signed won't just renew in 3 years, and they might even be incentivized for that to happen. So let's make sure sales and success are completely aligned. More proactive onboarding and monitoring that early adoption. And an example here, this is a global streaming brand where that premium entertainment experience that they promise has to be lived up to. If you don't live up to that experience, customers are going to churn instantly. And we've learned a lot. Whilst this isn't a B2B setting, we see in this industry huge churn if the customers don't get what they want. There's even some churn just because they're going to go away and come back. But actually, if we can manage the service and manage the experience and have that sort of future retention mindset, we're much better equipped to keep them on board and keep them subscribed. And that is going to apply equally in a B2B SaaS world. Same kind of thing matters. So better resolution of issues, orchestration of different things, whether it's customer support, customer help, or just engagement. And a lot of that is driven by tech. We're seeing huge advances in tech, especially AI, to enable that much better experience to be delivered. And you can start to live up to your promise of a fast, seamless, enterprise grade experience. So the outcome with that particular client was significant. We've driven the CSAT up relentlessly, and we get an even higher CSAT in their premier space. The third pressure point is around adoption. So we're sort of getting in now. We've got the client onboarded. We've managed to get them using the software or starting to use it, but have they fully adopted? Customers don't renew products that they bought. They actually renew products that they successfully adopted and relied on and are using day after day for their business as usual. And those products are driving value. So low adoption and usage risks creates revenue risks in the longer term. Some of the examples, usage might drop. You might get partial adoption. People might revert to old tools. You might get low executive sponsorship if you don't handle this adoption window really well. And back to what Tim said, that kind of executive buy-in, the adoption phase is just as important as the last step of the sales process. So how can we mitigate for this? Better adoption builds a foundation for retention and expansion, and it starts to mitigate for that longer term churn. So again, we a common theme here, we're trying to spot these things using analytics, using diagnostics, using AI is actually allowing us to analyze this data in platform and in situation much faster and much quicker. And then that allows us to redesign onboarding to mitigate for low adoption. Is the training right? Can we train people better? Can we use video and things, which is actually a part of our case study? Can we establish and keep that regular dialogue? And as Tim hinted at, keeping in touch with execs and buyers after the sale, because they need to see that the solution has been adopted and they need to see the value. So when you're doing a QBR, this is where we can talk about value rather than just performance and stats. I think we've all seen a QBR deck which has got 28 pages of stats after stats after stats, but is the solution driving value to them? And that's the key.
Yeah, Alex, there's two sort of outsized experiences that when we, I talked about win-loss and the buying experience. Now it's retention, churn, and the client experience. And there's two things that pop out at us. And one is this idea that you define some metrics to win the business. You now need to follow those same metrics as you execute in the business if you want to keep the same executive level altitude and buyers that were involved in the buying involved in the implementation. Too often, there's this sudden descent from meaningful metrics that got the deal done to project level metrics that only a few people care about. And so we always encourage identifying 3 levels of metrics: project level metrics, and then roll up to that business or department's goals and metrics, and how that then helps hit the corporate targets. Like there's a food chain, if you will. We call it the triple metric. And too many customer experience teams to your point, love to document things around the project, and they forget to ladder that up to the impacts and the measurements that matter. So documenting success metrics and continuing to monitor and report on that so that all levels of the business stay engaged. And the other is change management skills. I think the thing that we underestimate in CX is there's like support skills, like how do I handle tough situations? But before that, the tough situation you got to handle is you got to drive the change management, which equals adoption. And do you have those skills? Are you training to help people move adoption along by helping them bring change management? Because it doesn't just automatically happen. The deciders decided, but the doers don't necessarily do just because
Yes,
the decider
exactly.
said we're doing this. And so the most underestimated skill set and the most underestimated experience that we see when we look at the skill sets that CS teams and support teams and account management teams needs is you need to bring some change management expertise. You can't just count on the client to do that. They're actually expecting that out of you because you've implemented this more often than they have. So they're like,
Yes.
all right. And too often we're like, well, here it is. So change management for adoption and usage is I think the underestimated skill set, even
Overlooked a
the
lot. Yeah.
ability to manage competing interests, because now you're kind of the person brokering the peace between departments to get them all on board. You're asking them to do something their org chart doesn't let them do, so you have to do it. So it the support skill set has really migrated to more of a change management, conflict management sort of mindset, and those need to be developed. And you're being judged on those. So it's like that's
You
just
are.
not extra skill. That's not a soft skill. That's one that translates into retention or churn.
Absolutely. I think, hugely overlooked. So I agree with that in terms of the change management. And I loved how you talked about the three levels of KPIs there. And it's actually something we're working towards. So it's something we call experience economics. And it's where instead of thinking about those vanity metrics, which might be, you know, first contact resolution or average handle time or, SQL conversion, we look at more meaningful things and they ladder up to those business outcomes, which ultimately are all about revenue, they're about growth, they're about loyalty, they're about reduced cost, reduced effort. So if we can work towards those big picture things, the execs are going to be happy, your program's going to be running smoothly, and ultimately the customer's going to be getting value from the product and you're getting value from them as a customer. So it works both ways. Great. In terms of a case study here, so we do a lot of work with a leading logistics and shipping company, and one of the scenarios there is sort of a B2B scenarios where in their sort of retail locations for small businesses, the people have to use tools and online things as well. And we found that they were struggling to use some of those tools. So we worked on the onboarding, we created videos, we created additional training, kind of white glove treatment for those folks to make sure that they would focus on the right features, use the products efficiently, and ultimately adopt the products. And that meant a massive uptick in terms of using that particular tool versus the three or four other competitor options that they had in terms of choosing their shipping and delivery options. So a really powerful story where adoption can help you drive long-term revenue and retention. Our fourth one, so this is one, when you think about customer experience, lots of people think about this, the trust test. I've had a problem or multiple problems with my product or my service. It's maybe the single most emotionally important moment in the customer relationship because if something goes badly wrong, they're going to remember it and they're going to remember how you recovered or didn't recover from it. This is where things like slow resolution, unnecessary repeating of information, escalation fatigue because they've been passed on and on and on and on, all the way up to the highest levels of escalation. If that all goes badly, questions are going to be asked by the customer in terms of, can I trust this company under pressure? So, here's where we can better coordinate service and operations. We can handle those problems and sort of really boost trust. And it has knock-on effect to long-term retention and revenue expansion. So we need to look at coordination, look at ownership. A theme we're working towards now is what we're calling service orchestration. And this is where we can orchestrate a customer's journey across multiple parts of a service infrastructure. If it has to go off to fraud or finance for approval of a refund, if it has to go to the warehouse to ship a new product out, all those steps take time and they create an unnecessarily long service journey, which can cause problems. So if we can orchestrate that, have single ownership, we're going to work smoothly. And AI kicks in here clearly. Using a balance of AI and humans, we can start to identify the urgent problems and work out how to solve those, but deliver that empathetically, through the voice of a real person. So that's our trust test.
Yeah, I'll just add this, Alex. We've done some research on apology science, how to apologize for a service problem. And if you do it well, which means do all the things you just said, and then be able to document that in a way that memorializes your response, when you get to the point of renewal later on, and people are remembering that there was a service problem, there's this documented, memorialized, we call it euphemistically the apology framework. And instead of why change, why now, we call this why forgive, and there's something called the service recovery paradox, and it is what you can understand it to be, and it's both in B2C and B2B, that if you recover well from a problem, your recovery can create greater loyalty, greater advocacy, because it's not like people think they won't have problems elsewhere. And the thing they're going to remember is, how did you deal with that? Because they don't know how another company that they might go to would handle a similar issue, because issues do arise. So it's not whether or not you have problems. Sometimes it's exactly this. How did you handle that problem in a way where they actually become, you're stickier, they're more loyal, they're advocates, they expand because they're like under pressure. This is how they responded. And this is huge in terms of don't panic, have a plan on how to execute. And I would say the biggest thing we saw there, the biggest surprise to us, is people need to believe that you have restored their perception of lost value. The one thing that comes out of a service problem is they believe the value equation shifted. They've been paying and you haven't been delivering. And you need to restore that level of equilibrium, and maybe even when you talked about whether it's a refund or whether it's some other sort of restoration of perceived lost value, needs to be incorporated in the response and the documented response, because they're not looking for a sorry. They're looking for a, are we whole? Are we good?
Yeah.
And so I just throw that out there because that's some research we did, and some people are familiar with it. But I'm bringing it back for the sake that it fits in this conversation. So thanks, Alex.
No, I think that's great. And I think that apology framework, as you say, is something you could just build in naturally to your customer service playbook and your approach to certain types of issues that you're dealing with. So I love that. And then in terms of bring this alive, so we work with lots of tech brands. One in particular where we're doing exactly this kind of orchestrated tier 2 and tier 3 technical support and solving and resolving issues, coordinating them, handling complex service journeys. And we're already, because of that orchestration mindset and using data, tracking through dashboards and so on, starting to improve those service metrics versus where they used to be, and driving the turnaround time down significantly across these multiple fragmented steps. So last couple of pressure points, and then we'll wrap up with a sort of a look at how we can solve for them. So this one's quite interesting. This is what we call the revenue referendum. This is where people are now, okay, do I stay? Do I go? Do I make a different choice? And those renewal or repeat purchases are basically a final experience score. They're looking back, a bit like Tim was alluding to there. Have we maintained that equilibrium? Have we restored things if there was a problem? Have we delivered value like we said we would? Have they ultimately got what they needed from the product or service you offer? And problems that show up here, low adoption will definitely have an impact if not everyone has been using it, or maybe only using a subset of the features. people are going to think, let's shift, let's move to another platform that looks like it does the same, but it costs a bit less or has a few less features, but that's okay. Ongoing support friction that accumulates and it makes people think, actually, I didn't get that equilibrium justified. Weak relationship management. So yes, they might have had some basic support along the way, but have you managed the relationship with them over time? So lots of reasons why problems show up. This is where better relationship management drives the retention, renewal, and expansion. So it's not just a customer service thing at this point, customer experience, it's the relationship management. And we are seeing a real shift towards things like service and sell, where we're trying to do both things on behalf of our clients, or relationship managers who build relationships with different levels of customers. A lot of people have account teams and client teams, but they are often only pointed at the biggest customers with the most revenue. And you end up with that long tail of existing customers that you just can't maintain properly. And sometimes you think, well, self-serve, that will do. But actually, if you can use data to understand when you need to engage, actually proactive relationship management makes a difference. It can also help us recover declining revenue as well. So, one of the symptoms we sometimes see here is that sales are going down. People are buying less products. They might buy 5 things a month from you, but actually they've stopped, or they're only buying 3 of those 5 things. Maybe they're buying the other 2 somewhere else. So we can look at this, look at the data points and drive different recovery approaches. So this is an example. We worked with a major fuel card provider to sort of spot customers who are likely to churn, based on those different signals, and try and get in front of them a bit sooner. Try and fix some of those problems, take a multi-channel approach using email and phone and so on, and just really prevent that churn. And this is where the CVI, Corporate Vision's "Why Stay" message kicks in. We can tell people at this point, why should they stay? And really sort of quantify that and back that up. And in this case, was very successful in terms of preventing churn. Over to Tim.
Yeah, I think that one of the things is that when we go to renewal time, there's a lot of pressure in organizations to get more. Like, I was working with a company that was like, we have a goal of a 50% attach rate of additional things. And last year, and this year we're going to go for 80%. And the pressure then on the account team is to kind of lead with, here's what's new. And you start acting like it's a new sales cycle for a new thing, but you've neglected to firmly establish your position as their lead partner. And that's what the "Why Stay" message is about, that you need to reassert the impact that you've had and even assert the investment that both sides have made, because you want them to believe they've sunk plenty of time, money, and stomach lining, and they've achieved great results, because the new thing might create a little disruption that opens the door to a competitor who also has that new thing. And before you create and disrupt your client, you want to firmly establish and assert your position and take advantage of your incumbency, because then the new thing looks like a promise of something additional, as opposed to a huge disruption, which causes them to rethink everything. So putting a stake in the ground for the business impact, outcomes, and results, and also documenting the mutual investment and effort in time and money and stomach lining that everybody's put into it, creates this barrier against competitors because they don't want to put that at risk. And then you can talk about your new thing. And so we just find too many renewal conversations under too much pressure to lead with what's new. And all you did was disrupt yourself. And when in reality, you want them to see that as the next success that they're going to have based on the success we've already had together.
Absolutely. Yeah, 100% agree. Final one. So this is my personal fave. This is a project we're working on, every day at the moment, and it's how we can tackle the win back opportunity. So some of these customers that we've worked with over time may have been lost to a competitor, or they may be significantly declined. And they'll do that long before they officially churn as well. You don't know they've gone. They're just starting to decline in their orders. Um, so the win back opportunity is a great moment that organizations can discover whether trust, value, and relevance can be rebuilt to sort of bring them back and to recover that declined revenue. Some of the problems that show up here, declining sales figures, declining engagement, declining usage, a loss of trust or confidence, reduced perception of the value. Maybe they're starting to think your prices are higher than the competitors, and they'll start to switch. So how can we mitigate that? I think again, we really buckets into a few things. There's always that trying to spot these things, spot those churn signals, spot the declining revenue, spot the declining usage, spot the frustration, identify why customers really left. And you can do that through speaking to some of these customers, surveys, you can get feedback, you can engage with them and understand why are their orders declining. And sometimes it's a really easy fix. Actually, I think you're more expensive. Well, actually, no, we're not more expensive. Or, actually, the delivery times are slow. Well, actually, our delivery times are just as quick, and we put this new guarantee in place, and we've put more stock in place to order from. So there's lots of ways you can address this. And ultimately, in our case study, which I'll show in a second, basically taking a very proactive approach to win back and recovery generally can really drive successful results. And secondly, it shows you the why the decline is happening, and you can then fix that in your products and your services and your customer support and your pricing and so on afterwards. So very powerful again.
Yeah, and it's underestimated the power of the win back. And this is why I appreciate our partnership, Alex. You guys have taken to the framework that we've developed through research on how to win back lost customers. But the first thing to understand is that comes from research that identified that high performing reps versus lower performing reps, higher performing reps disproportionately generate new business from lost business as opposed to taking competitive share by a factor of 3x. So basically, high performing reps understand that lost customers are the lowest hanging fruit. They're not the same as trying to take a competitive account because there's some actual history with you. And you may be like, yeah, but that history was kind of, but the reality is they're now having a new history with a company where it could be that and then some. So what you need to know is what we have found through this research is it matters why the customer left. There's 3 reasons customers leave. They were pushed away by something you did. They were pulled away by something the competitor did spectacularly, or they were priced away. And each of those requires a slightly different approach to gain back. And some are easier to get back than others. It turns out that salespeople believe that the hardest customer to get back is one that you pushed away. And the reality is it's one of the easier to get back because you can go with a story of how you've changed those things that pushed customers away. Typically, you don't just lose one customer, you lose a multitude of customers for similar reasons. And if you can go back, I like to jokingly refer to this as not why change, this is we've changed. And you go back and say, these are the things we've spotted through feedback from companies like you, and here's how we've addressed them. The reality is many of those companies are not getting anything better from their new partner than they got from you. And now they see you being responsive and it brings them back. So the ones you pushed away are easier to get back than the ones your competitors pulled away by doing something spectacular and different than you did. But yet salespeople think it's that latter one that's easier.
It's the harder one, yeah, and the easier.
Yeah, but it's the hardest one. Priced away is just one of those things where you got to decide, do you really want to go back after that group or not? Because they're just
Yes.
going to be
Yeah.
like a ping pong ball. And all we say is that approach is like, you just go with a question. Is the grass greener? Are you getting what you paid for? And maybe not, that's not good. It doesn't mean you now try to price away and bring them back. You just try to find out if that move was worth it. So there's
Yeah.
very strategic ways to understand why people left and then how to approach them. And I love the fact that Hart Hanks has adopted those from our research. And here's an example. They're doing well
Exactly.
with it.
Exactly. Yeah. And this literally did embrace the whole why return, the why expand. And we looked at the pull, the push, the price component when we're speaking to these recovery, declining and lost customers. So case study is a great testimony to both your framework, but also taking a very proactive and relationship-based approach to this. And we've seen significant, literally huge amounts of revenue recovered for this client, and they are beyond happy, I think, with it. So when you put it all together, you'll all remember the revenue waterfall. Some of the best practices talk about the revenue waterfall, but now we have the experience failure waterfall, so to speak. And if these frictions build up and the revenue can erode, so we don't want that. So let's wrap up with how can we solve for this? And final, very quick musical interlude. 10 seconds. Everyone should know who this is. Story of Angels, Playing with My Heart. That's obviously Annie Lennox and David Stewart back in 1985. And we like this because we really see the way forward as being an orchestra of humans orchestrating your revenue and your customer experience. So a little bit cheesy, and I nearly added humans and agents because we know AI is going to play a big part in this as well. So what does that actually look like? So I'll just remind you of that connected modern revenue system. And as you can see, we have our interlocked spheres of revenue, relationships, and retention, where we're not only working as a team in terms of marketing and sales and the onboarding and the operations and support, but those groups are all working together as well. And it's really all about that experience, intelligence, orchestration, and enablement. So let's just dig into that really quickly. So I'll build this out. So for us, this is all about signals, those data points, spotting the friction points, spotting the customer behaviors, looking at the data. Then it's a strategy, AI and analytics equation, and using tech and obviously AI to help us spot patterns, create the right strategy for the next best action, the next best conversation. All things we've probably heard and are familiar with, but I think with technology, they're increasingly practical and realistic. The key then is the orchestration. How can you orchestrate that next best action? How can you do a trigger-based engagement? How can you speak to a customer about the right thing to keep them, to grow them, to expand them? And route your problems to the right people to make a call be solved quicker, escalate things smoothly, take them on a win-back journey. And then at the front line, ultimately, are the human engagement piece where sales or service or customer care or customer success interact with those clients. So, what should we do next? The goal is no longer just better CX. The goal is better revenue outcomes. And where can we start? We like to think about a revenue experience diagnostic, which allows you to think about the moments that create that revenue pressure in your world. Is it more about revenue generation versus revenue protection? Is it kind of a case of understanding your maturity in certain parts of how you deliver experience, and then basically going through this process to identify friction, look at the different signals, prioritize the moments that matter, begin to orchestrate actions, and then enable teams with that tech, to help them understand the customer sentiment, to understand the problem and how to solve it as quickly as possible, and not using AI to replace that frontline team of sales, customer success, or customer service pins, but using AI to accelerate how they do that. And that basically leads us to sort of 5 takeaways, and we can wrap up. So if you were to do 5 things when you leave this webinar, hopefully some of these are on your list. Mapping those revenue critical moments, starting to look at the customer signals, getting your teams aligned, operationalizing some of those customer moments, and trying to measure experience. A bit like Tim said, those 3 levels of KPIs, measure it from a more economic view in terms of revenue, retention, loyalty, reducing effort and reducing costs. And that's pretty much us. So Tim, any sort of final thoughts to wrap up?
Yeah, I'll share this because I love the depth and the holistic view of this. I was talking to a prominent, large human capital management company, and they were talking about this person is in charge of customer success. And from the top of the organization, including the board, they're mandating a drive for higher NPS scores. And they're incenting higher NPS scores among their customer success staff. And now what you get is customer success staff basically negotiating with their customers to give them a high NPS score based on personal appeal. And they're getting higher NPS scores, and it has done nothing to reduce their churn. And I think there's a couple things there. Our data shows that NPS scores are no better than a coin flip at predicting churn or retention. It's about a 53% predictive measure, which means it's a coin flip. And the other is then if you start forcing and getting false positives, if you will, like a medical term, you'll be even more shocked when your retention rates go down. But it's not because you really delivered on these things you're showing here. It's because you basically gamed the NPS score. And so I believe NPS scores are already problematic, and they only get worse when you put force unnatural acts on them. I don't know. What say you, Alex, in our last minute?
Well, I know we've talked about this before, and I agree with you. I think, this definitely is why we want to think about more commercial focused things that you can truly measure and that don't lie. Your revenue doesn't lie, churn doesn't lie. Um, the challenge is they can take a little bit of time sometimes to reveal themselves. So you've got to look for those leading indicators, and sometimes NPS might be a good leading indicator. In other cases, it may not be, but in isolation, it definitely isn't. I think you've got to combine a bunch of those kind of tier one and tier two data points to build up to ultimately knowing that you're driving, the right direction of revenue or effort and cost savings.
Yeah, I was going to applaud you that all the friction points and all the things to watch for underneath them. Not once did you say, beware of a failing or falling NPS score, because
Yeah,
yeah, there are way better signals
there are.
and way better interventions. So
There
awesome.
are.
We are at the top of the hour. If you want to just roll it out with your last couple slides, that'd be great.
Yeah. So one final thought, obviously experience equals growth. And I think certainly for B2B customers, if you don't treat customer experience as more than a support function, you might create yourself problems. So see it as part of the operating system of revenue and try to get to work on improving experience along the entire journey. And obviously, huge thank you to Tim and to Corporate Visions. Really enjoyed taking the time to run through this and would love to connect with folks and speak more about this topic, whether it's about, how to practically implement the experience economics we're talking about, how to practically orchestrate both revenue and service. So do get in touch, check us out on hearthanks.com. Feel free to link in with me and love to continue the conversation.
Alex, it's been a pleasure. I knew once I saw the data that our community needed to hear it, and really appreciate how clear this was. It's not a lot, but it was very clear and chunky, making it approachable. So well done. Thank you for that. Thanks everybody for joining us. And you were all believers already, but take this recording back to your organization and help them see that CX is really the number one growth lever you have, and it shouldn't be an accident. You should do it on purpose. And here were some tools today. So thanks, Alex, and thanks everybody.
Thanks, Tim. Thanks, everybody.